August 1st, 2010. Good evening. I'm Eric Hackley, and this is Hackonomics. Today, we're going to be talking about tapping your potential, because a lot of people don't know how you go about, becoming the best that you can be. We always hear on the commercials, especially for the military, about how to be the best that you can be. But sometimes, because of no control of our own, it's difficult to do that. And to help me shed some light on that, I have Mr. Ron Pearman here with me, who's from the representative of the Carriage House. And Ron, correct me if I don't say this correctly. Later in life, you were diagnosed with a mental disorder?
Right, a mental illness.
Mental illness. All right, we're going to talk about that, but, a few weeks ago, you gave me a paper that you wrote, and the paper was really interesting, and to quote one of the comments on there, you wrote, many great minds have experienced some form of mental illness, and, when you're writing the paper and you came across that statement, what impressed you about your paper that really, what I'm getting at is what is about great minds that made you see something in yourself?
Well, I'm not saying I have a great mind, but I was doing this research for a talk that I was doing at Brown Mackie College, and in the process of the research, I was researching mental illness and great minds who have it. And it really boosted my self-esteem to find out that many of the great people, like presidents, like artists and singers, and a lot of the great people in the world have experienced some form of mental illness. And in doing my reading on these things, I found out that people who have experienced a mental illness have their minds opened up creatively in a way that people who don't experience mental illnesses don't usually get their minds opened up to. So people with mental illnesses a lot of times are more creative because of what the mental illness does to the brain.
I mean, for example, how does that work? What do you mean by that when you have your mind opened up in a way that people who don't go through that do?
Well, people who don't go through mental illnesses a lot of times don't block out, or do block out in things that come into their life, outside stimuli, so that they hear. People with mental illnesses don't block it out. They hear more, they see more, it comes at them from all directions, and they process it more than people who don't experience the mental illnesses. The people that don't experience it block that out, and they just focus on what's right there with them. So people who don't block it out, the people with mental illnesses, they're open to more creativity that way. Somehow it affects them. I haven't done a whole lot of research on it to find out exactly why, but I found out that a lot of the people, composers, physicists, inventors, a lot of the people that have done well with using their brains have experienced a mental illness in some way.
And I think I fall victim to that category too, which I didn't know that this was a mental illness, but I was not really an overly hyper kid or anything, but I had no difficulty in keeping different channels going. I mean, having multiple conversations going here, and I noticed, I did talk to a psychiatrist one time, and he said that I was suffering from, I was always on the high side of manic depressive. Now, I've never been depressed ever, but I could always work at an intense level for a long period of time, and then when I started reading on that, I found out that that's a common trait among achievers, that they can push the accelerator and go. Of course, you do it too long, you'll explode. But is that what you meant by what you said earlier?
Well, that was part of what happened with my situation, was that when I was in college at Valparaiso University, I was seeing people do the all-nighters that are so famous for college students, and I started doing that. Part of the reason that I felt the need to do that was because when I was preparing for college, I didn't develop my background well enough. Then I got into college, and I was really not doing very well, so I was trying to push to studying more. So I was staying up all night trying to study, and I would stay up all night before exams. Found out later that that doesn't work. It doesn't work as well as getting the rest you need. But during the staying up all night times, right at that time was when I had my first hospitalization. And so I understand that pushing myself with all the pressure that I was under led to the mental illness, but then it was the mental illness that opened up my creativity, and I became a writer. And so that it really benefited me. It was a dark, hard road, but it really benefited me, and I'm not ashamed of it. There were times during that time that I did embarrassing things, but looking back now, I can say, wow, what a blessing. This really benefited me.
So now, as you were going through high school, how were your grades, and were you at all intimidated when you went to Valparaiso?
Well, all through grade school and junior high, my grades were like C's, D's, F's. When I got to high school, it's kind of like starting over. I got into algebra. I asked my English teacher, Mr. Boylan at Southside High, to put me in a higher lane of English because I was really having a hard time. It was really hard work in the lowest lane. He said, you'll have to do essays. I said, well, I'd rather do that. So he put me up in the next lane, and I got an A on my first essay. And I really found out that I liked writing. Before I did really well at spelling, you know, I didn't do very well at vocabulary, learning the definitions of words at that time. But I did really well at spelling, so when I was writing, I wrote coherent papers with the spelling. It really was a struggle to learn what words mean, and for years I didn't really catch on to that. But in high school, I got into drama. I found out how to do more writing, and it really blossomed me out into a writer. I still struggled with it for years, but now I have become a writer.
So now, as you're going through, especially with English, and having difficulty in a lower lane, usually a person wants to make it easier, but yet you chose a route that perhaps could have been more difficult. Why did you choose to almost go right to the center of what your problem was as opposed to seeking the easier way?
Well, part of the reason was knowing that I was in the lowest lane was a blow to my ego. And I thought, well, maybe if I felt better about what I'm doing, it would be easier to do it. That's part of the reason. And so when I was moved up, I thought, well, now I'm, in a higher lane. That means I'm a person of more worth, and I tried to act like the person of more worth. I had already built in the ability to be a writer. I just didn't know that. But when I got into a higher lane, I was able to develop that. But one of the main reasons that I got into a higher lane was because I wanted to excel at what I was doing, and I didn't feel like I had the motivation to do it in a lower lane.
So that all that worked together. So as you're, how did you unlock your mind? How did the creative potential release itself during this process?
Well, I think just having the force of having to write a paper in English class that beginning time, that was really the major push. And yet I had things to say. I had difficulties in my life. I had down times that needed expressing, and it was an outlet. it was a way of healing for me, of past things that had happened. I think, if I remember right, my first essay was about a dog I had that died. I wrote an essay about that. And so the writing was a way to express things that I'd gone through and get that out of my system.
But as you were going through this process of learning how to write, at that point in time, did you know that you had real deficiencies in certain areas?
Oh yes, I knew that I had a hard time paying attention in class. I really didn't know for sure why. I found out part of the reason was I needed glasses, and I couldn't see the board. And in younger grades, I'd sit there in class and struggle and couldn't pay attention. And the teachers would tell my parents, he's a bright kid, if he could just pay attention and do the work, he could do it. But then I had home problems and distractions, and I was new in Fort Wayne from the South, and had been made fun of by the kids in school, and there was a lot of things going on. As I developed mental illness and had delusions, you know, when you have delusions, it causes visions, it causes thoughts to develop fantasy, and I use all that fantasy in my writings.